Dr. Naomi Wolf will be joining us as soon as she can, but I'm going to start with the guests in the green room. Steve Kirsch, the high-tech serial entrepreneur turned investigative journalist who has authored over 1,500 articles on vaccine safety on his Substack, covering COVID mitigation policies, vaccines, corruption, censorship, and early treatments. The data shows that vaccines are ruining the health of Americans and continuing the epidemic in a variety of health conditions. Now, Steve, as many of you know, is the founder of the Vaccine Safety and Research Foundation and has been one of the most outspoken mainstream and non-medical critics of the COVID vaccination program.
Hi, Sacha. Good to be here.
Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, friends, a medical doctor, board certified in osteopathic medicine with certification in integrative medicine. She previously worked as a full-time emergency medicine physician and director of a level 2 trauma center for 12 years. She's founder of Tenpenny Integrative Medical Center, a clinic near Cleveland, Ohio, that provides natural and holistic approaches to getting well and has attracted patients from all 50 states and more than 20 countries around the world. Sherri's authority in the field of vaccines is unparalleled and highly recognized, as you all know. And over the last almost 25 years, she has invested tens of thousands of hours of research, writing, and speaking nationally and internationally. Sherri, so happy to see you today.
Thank you so much, Sacha. Thank you for inviting me.
Tom Renz, friends, acclaimed attorney, political commentator, educator, health freedom advocate, businessman, and patriot. He has gained international attention for his work challenging corruption in the U.S. government and advocating for individual liberty, medical freedom, and informed choice. Renz's legal expertise and relentless advocacy have established him as a leading voice in the fight for our freedoms. And notably, he is the only American to ever clerk with the Honorable Justice Tarun Chatterjee of the Supreme Court of India, and he is licensed to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court, which makes him a rather difficult customer for the status quo. Tom has testified before numerous state and federal elected officials and committees and has spoken at countless events with audiences exceeding tens of thousands about the issues we are covering today. Tom, thank you for joining us today.
Honored to be here, Sacha. Thrilled to see you, Sherri and Steve. Just great people. Glad to be here.
Yes, we have Dr. Naomi Wolf in the green room. She is the best-selling author, columnist, and professor. She is a graduate of Yale University and received a doctorate from Oxford. She is co-founder and CEO of dailyclout.io, a successful civic tech company. And since the publication of her landmark international bestseller, The Beauty Myth, which the New York Times called one of the most important books of the 20th century, Dr. Wolf's other 7 bestsellers have been translated worldwide, and she's written for every major news outlet in the US and many globally. She had 4 opinion columns, including in The Guardian and the Sunday Times of London. She must be congratulated on the recent hard copy publication of the Pfizer papers, as she puts it, the book that 2 governments, 4 agencies, 6 tech platforms, and 2 gigantic multinational industries sought and failed to suppress. We will ask about what they wanted to hide so badly. Dr. Wolf, what did they want to hide so badly?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, especially with what an array of my personal heroes you've got with you today. I mean, I feel like I shouldn't say anything. I should just kind of sit in worship and gratitude. I can't believe I'm seeing Dr. Tenpenny and my friend Steve Kirsch and Tom Renz. Amazing. So you all probably know the highlights because either you've participated in the journey or broken some of the key stories elsewhere in related news, because you're all pioneers in this field. But this is specifically the first commercial publication of 50 of the 109 now reports produced by our team of 3,250 doctors and scientists who volunteered under the leadership of Amy Kelly, my COO, and at the instigation of Steve Bannon, our friend in prison. Currently, they volunteered to read through and analyze and produce reports explaining what's in the 450,000 Pfizer documents released under court order via a successful lawsuit by attorney Aaron Steary. The documents that the FDA asked the court to keep hidden for 75 years. And as you all know, and your audience knows because we've spoken about it, but now they can actually hold the evidence in their hands. This book documents the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history.
Very good. Thanks, Naomi. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to please just give their 3 or 4 minute update, quick status update. Dr. Sherri, I'm start with you if that's okay. A state of the world today as it relates to human health and survival.
Well, I think that the biggest thing I would say is that they're pulling all sorts of stops. They're pulling everything out, and so they are backed up against the wall, and because they know that we have exposed them, and all the incredible work that Naomi and Steve and Tom have all done to expose what they are doing. I would just say that they've tried bird flu, which just was kind of a big flop. They're trying monkeypox, which is an equal big flop. And I think that the reason they defined something as disease X, because X means fill in the blank. I mean, whatever you want to put in there next. And so they're trying to ramp up the fear machine, which gratefully really isn't working. And so I would just say that the best idea is, with all the stuff that happened through COVID, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, I am not going to let that happen. And I've spoken to a lot of groups. I just spoke to a big group last night at the preview of the Vax 3 movie, which is a whole compilation of people divided into categories of people that were vaccine injured, people that died from the COVID shot of vaccine injury, people that died in the hospital because of the horrible malpractice care. And I've said from the beginning, for the last 3 years, people didn't die in the hospital from COVID, they died of medical malpractice. And after watching that film last night, I felt like every one of these hospitals that they had interviewed people, hundreds and hundreds of people that had horrible stories. They were all the same all across the country. Somebody should go out and take a big yellow tape and wrap them around these hospitals, and because they're crime scenes. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to get to the bottom of that, and the people in hospitals and the doctors will be held accountable.
Very good. Thank you. Steve, can I ask you the same question? 9/11 Planetary Healthcheck status update. How do you see it?
Well, I think the conclusion is pretty clear that all the data points to the COVID vaccines being enormously unsafe and not beneficial at all. So there have been several studies that have had revealing statistics showing there's no hospitalization benefit. You actually get more infections if you take the COVID jabs. And of course, there's no death benefit whatsoever. It's only downside for these vaccines. They're making you more likely to die, so they're increasing your all-cause mortality. And there was a data disclosure, it was under a Freedom of Information Act in the Czech Republic. And the person was able to obtain over 10 million records of everyone in the Czech Republic, including when they got vaccinated, if they got vaccinated, and when they died, if they died. And it's very clear that there are brand differences between the vaccines. There are major brand differences between the vaccine. And yet, not a single health authority in the entire world is measuring the differences in mortality, in all-cause mortality caused by vaccine, COVID vaccine A versus COVID vaccine B versus COVID vaccine C. So the question that any critical thinker would ask is, if they're trying to protect us, why wouldn't they be disclosing these statistics? Now, so you don't have to believe me. And, I've been accused of being a spreader of misinformation. All you have to do is believe the information which they are not telling you. And they are not telling you the relative risk in terms of all-cause mortality of these vaccines. And the reason they're not telling you the relative risks are because it would be an admission that, in fact, they screwed up. So that will never happen. So the health authorities aren't going to talk about it. and the mainstream media is not going to cover it. It's the same thing with, there's a young 23-year-old girl in the hospital right now. She was forced to take 3 vaccines, and these were not COVID vaccines. These are other vaccines that are supposedly, safe and effective. And those vaccines caused a horrific reaction. And the doctors for days gave her nothing but painkillers to address the very serious symptoms that she's had. She didn't have the proper workups done. She didn't have the tests that were needed. And so now we're arranging to have those tests done and for her to get the care that she needs. But there's complete denial as to what the cause of that of her injuries were, even though they happened 10 minutes after she got the 3 vaccines. So you're looking at someone who's perfectly normal, who for all intents and purposes looks just like me, and 10 minutes after she gets 3 vaccines, none of them a COVID vaccine, 10 minutes later, she cannot see. And so this is a huge problem of denial. And the physician that ordered that she get the shot in order to receive medical care, she said, well, it couldn't be the vaccines because the vaccines are safe and this has never happened before. So it must have been something else. And so the degree of denial in the medical community, and by the way, her reaction is typical. The degree of denial in the medical community is simply astonishing. I talked to a paramedic recently, and he's well known on Twitter, and I asked him, how many vaccine deaths have you seen? He said over 20 that he would swear to. And so there are at least 130,000 paramedics, 130 to 170,000 paramedics. And if you do the math, if he is an extreme outlier, in other words, he's the only guy in the country to see 20 events, then it means the average number of events seen by a paramedic is 6. And you take 6 and you multiply it by, let's call it 120,000 paramedics. That's 720,000 deaths caused by the vaccine estimated using this method. We can use other methods to estimate the death toll from the COVID vaccine, and they come up with similar numbers. So we can use doctor observations, and the doctors I talk to average around 4 to 5 vaccine deaths per 1,000 patients vaccinated. So if you assume that they are 2 standard deviations away from the mean, that means the mean is somewhere around 2 deaths per 1,000, which would, because there are 270 million vaccinations, we're looking at a rate of over 540,000 Americans have been killed by these vaccines. And yet, nobody wants to talk about that in Congress for some reason.
Indeed. Thank you, Steve. Very sobering indeed. Tom, has anything changed since we last spoke? It seems to me that it's very much a static game, just the spiking seems to be creeping skyward everywhere you look, but the general sort of métier of reality seems to be very much the same since we last spoke, rather depressively so, I must say. What is your status update?
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you that it's actually gotten worse. To sum it up in a very unprofessional word, FUBAR, I think best applies here. So what's occurred is that we see the continued gain of function work, and it's ongoing in the U.S., right? The gain of function, and I would say there's 2 main strains of things that we need to look at. The continued gain of function and development of things to make you sick so they can give you something to make you well, and the push to normalize and integrate this mRNA platform into all things. Those are critical, and they're 2 distinct things. And the bad guys are making progress on both. I define bad guys as anybody who is promoting something that is unsafe and ineffective because they made $14 trillion in the U.S. alone off of the first COVID go-around. So what we've seen is McCullough put out a great proximal origins paper on the bird flu that was coming out. Now, I've been able to verify and validate some of that, and we were actually able to, with some whistleblower stuff, we didn't make this public because I didn't think it was worth the distraction, but we were able to verify there's a number of people in the, I believe in the Georgia University system that seem to be working on various things related to gain of function. Some of the same people who were involved in the Wuhan lab are now in Georgia doing work related to the bird flu, it appears. It's kind of terrifying, and they're making it more dangerous. We see the monkeypox. Now, interestingly enough, monkeypox, which is really an absolute joke. I mean, they declared a World Health emergency over something that had less than 1,000 deaths in 2 years. But they declared it on this new, more dangerous strain of monkeypox. Interestingly enough, that new, more dangerous strain mimics a proposal that was approved by Anthony Fauci in 2015, whereby Anthony Fauci allowed them to mix two strains of monkeypox, one more deadly, one more virulent, to create this new thing. Now, that funding, which HHS denied that they did anything with, was actually, it was there, the funding was there, the approval was there, and the approval was only withdrawn in 2023, right before the new current strain of monkeypox hit, which I'm sure is an absolute coincidence. Interestingly enough, or even more interestingly, one of the things that you probably haven't seen is that with this new particular strain that they were engineering in, by the way, NIAID's genetic engineering department, which, why do we have that? Interestingly enough, this new strain used a strain of monkeypox, and the clade 2 strain was called USA 2003. Please tell me how it is that we had a monkeypox named USA 2003. I mean, could it be that it was developed in the USA with gain of function work in 2003? I'm not saying that's suspicious, but really? Point being here that the gain of function is continuing. They're continuing with gain of function work on the coronaviruses. They're continuing in the monkeypox. And we know that they're spending over $1 billion on disease X, which is coming. It could be one disease. It could be multiple diseases. Everybody's speculating about what disease X will be. It will be here. We don't know what it will be, but I am quite certain that it's sitting on a shelf right now, that it's the product of gain of function work, which is continuing unabated right now. Nobody wants to talk about it. And with each one of these gain of function projects, at the same time they're doing the gain of function work, they're creating, air quotes, vaccines, all of which are going to be mRNA based, to go with them. So expect disease X, expect a whole bunch of vaccines sometime in the near future, so that they can try and argue that this WHO treaty should be fully implemented in the United States. The WHO treaty, legally, I can tell you, it cannot actually, one of the things our side does is we've made the mistake of saying that, it'll take over the Constitution. Well, technically it can't. Okay, as a lawyer, it's not possible for a treaty to supersede a Constitution. But we've certainly seen under the lawless Biden administration and all the nonsense to COVID, they don't really care about the Constitution. So who knows what they'll actually do. The other thing that I think is really important to talk about is something that we do actually have the capacity to do something about if we were to have the funding to file the lawsuit to do it. The integration of mRNA into other platforms is, to my mind, illegal, and demonstrably so. We would not have been able to do much with this, but for one key factor. The Loper decision overturned the Chevron doctrine, and Chevron deference is no longer there. This is wonderful news, and it's something that I have in my pocket, and I'm keeping my keg dry on it. I intend to make use of it if and when it's necessary, but it's something that could probably be used sooner rather than later. There's a number of cases that could be filed related to that in Administrative Procedures Act, because the integration of this unsafe and ineffective platform that's done absolutely nothing positive for anyone into already approved platforms. For example, integrating this into a flu shot or into some of these other shots that are out there, to me seems like a wildly illegal move. It seems like a great, huge overreach by the FDA. I don't think they can actually do that. I would love to file that case, or to have it, to assist in filing that case, and am looking into it right now, to be honest. But I think those are really the keys. The push, we've seen the mRNA integration into the foods and into some of these other things. End of the day, they are hell-bent on making sure that every person in this country is exposed to this mRNA. And by the way, I saw some of the great work Naomi's done on the chemtrails. We actually have, I have a credible group of scientists that have presented me data, and it's not far enough for me to say that it's proof yet. They have kind of reverse engineered a mechanism by which they believe that they could actually aerosol. Well, first of all, we know they're aerosolizing the vaccines. Aerosolized vaccines are real. They can spread these through the air. That's not myth. That's fact. We can show it. And there's a group of scientists who are claiming that credibly, in my opinion, it's not been peer reviewed or fully studied yet, that they may actually be able to spread some of this even via a chemtrail, that they've been able to design some of this in a way so robust that it might even survive that sort of disbursement. And now, is that happening? I'm not saying it is at all. But I'm saying, why are we working on developing aerosolized vaccines? Why are we working to develop these vaccine mosquitoes? Bill Gates has funded to the tune of billions of dollars vaccine mosquitoes. How can you get informed consent if you put a vaccine into a mosquito or spray it in the air? Why would you develop that if you aren't going to use it? And how can you use it with informed consent? You can't. So I would say the state of things is actually, in a lot of ways, getting worse. But because no one's telling you have to wear a mask, people are becoming complacent and not giving it its due credit.
Very good. Well, I can tell you, in Africa, I'm speaking to a number of political leaders. In fact, I gave a lecture last Saturday, and I got a message from the High Commissioner the day before saying that the King of Kings, the Supreme Paramount Chief King of Kings, I think Cornelius Botha, the sixth, wanted to come into my talk, sat in the front row and brought 26 of the paramount chiefs and kings of Southern Africa to my 4.5-hour rant. And boy, I didn't hold back any punches. All I can say is that they will not be complying with the WHO. And there are many countries in Africa that are lighting up right now with younger generational hereditary leaders and political animals from generational families in political families, and they're not standing for it. They seem to have seen through it. And anyway, that's my takeaway from Africa, which is quite edifying, I have to say. Naomi, I saw you grimace when Tom mentioned Fauci. I just saw the grimace on your face. The WHO treaty, Fauci, Disease X, all of the above, just a really bad Batman script. Do you believe this is going to manifest Disease X?
Disease X. Well, first I want to just thank you, Sacha, because I've certainly been noticing that Africa keeps dissenting. It's the only block of dissent to the WHO treaty I'm aware of. Geographically, and I was wondering how that was happening, what the information stream is, and you're clearly at least one of the important information streams, so that's exciting, and that's a story. I mean, if there's any independent media down there that wants to invite me over to report on this network of leaders who are not going along with it, I think that's very, very newsworthy. Now let me go to Disease X. Well, I really agree with what I think Dr. Tenpenny said, or maybe it was Steve Kirsch. I mean, like, by now the apocalypse, it's so kind of multivalent that it's almost hard to track the many threads of the drama of annihilating or just destroying human beings. But, obviously, and, what Mr. Renz pointed out, obviously, the Disease X is a manufactured thing that's going to be rolled out with a solution that will be bad for us or that we can't verify. I don't think that's a surprise, and I think Dr. Tenpenny was very right to say they tried Mpox, they tried was the other one? Bird flu. Yeah. And humans are, to their credit, they do learn to avoid things that are cutting or burning them. By the third time, they're not falling for it. So that's wonderful. So then the next question is, what's the control matrix going to be? And I just looked at the EU Commission kind of portfolios, and I'm seeing how in the European Union, they're really rolling out a number of kind of control grids that will very effortlessly coerce people, one way or another. And certainly they've drained national sovereignty in Europe, especially with these new portfolios. So without national sovereignty, really, you can have a constitution, but you really have no way practically to, have a cease and desist order or stop bad treaties at the supranational level or bad policies at the supranational level. So I guess I'm less worried about what disease X is, because it's just obvious that it's going to be disease X, and it's going to be, I'm definitely anticipating a strike of some kind or a terrorist attack. Like I'm seeing, we've got 48 days to the election in the US. I'm seeing people are losing their minds, right? The people in charge of this country, the United States, are losing their minds. The people were burned at a Trump rally with what seemed like microwave weapons. There was a second assassination attempt against President Trump, a few days ago. It's literally, I'm getting scary letters from a government agency I'm not even going to, name. I mean, everything is ramping up, and I'm sure all the dissidents are one way or another. I think Matt Taibbi wrote a Substack about, it was a little opaque, but, I think a lot of us are probably realizing that we're being targeted. I mean, my technology got hacked. I mean, any of us can say the same thing, right? It's a losing their minds kind of time, and they're going to throw everything at us. So I'm less worried about disease X, more concerned about, are people stockpiling food? Do they have generators? Do they have, medical supplies? I've been very interested in herbal remedies and natural remedies, because we have to keep ourselves healthy. If the whole grid goes down, or if, the whole medical system won't treat us anymore because we're dissidents, right? I expect that there will be a disease X, just like there's going to be a bunch of other attacks waged on us. And if, God forbid, it's another Harris Biden or whatever, whoever's running the country, Harris-Walz administration, or a Harris-Walz administration, there's really going to be no boundaries. I mean, I promise I'll stop talking, but I'm in New York State, and the number 2 in Kathy Hochul's office, the governor's office, turned out to be a Chinese asset, meaning the number 1 hired a Chinese asset. God knows who the number 1 is, the chief of staff. Meaning all of the policies in New York State were vetted, if not deployed, by China. And you can see it, and it means that the quarantine camps, which are just like those in China, which they've set up and they keep wanting to populate here in New York State, it'll be full speed ahead if it's a Biden-Harris regime, or at the WHO treaty. Either way, Biden-Walz, right? Harris-Walz.
Well, I'll tell you, in 2009, 2010, when I was a Director General in the United Nations, a lot of the high brass were Chinese assets. In fact, my last day there, I do recall kicking the door of the SecGen in and calling him an MF to his face in broad daylight, precisely because I could see, as could Dr. David Martin, who was working closely with me at that time on a very specific set of initiatives that we were trying to bring into the multilateral playing field. Mm-hmm. But we could see that the Chinese were buying out the basement of the IGO and the NGO sector in the UN, and I tried to confront the high brass on that very fact, and that was 15 years ago. So and we discovered that the Clinton Global Initiative behind most of that, I have to say.
Really?
Yeah.
So you were the Deputy Secretary General of the UN?
No, I was a Director General in the United Nations in the intergovernmental sector. And my portfolio was renewable energy and sustainability and all of that hoo-ha talk, which was really a a build up to installing scarcity economics into the world as a kind of model. And that was, that was 15 years ago.
So that's a pretty senior position, Sacha.
It was not really. I mean, there are a number of intergovernmental organizations, IGOs, and the UN. That's how the UN is constructed. It's a globalist machine. A lot of good people trapped in a really shitty system. It's an extension of the League of Nations. It's a Fabianist Tavistockian construct. Anyone who knows the real science, the forensic science of globalism. But the UN itself is an empty vessel. But they have many intergovernmental organizations, IGOs, and then underneath that, a potpourri of NGOs. Mm-hmm. And it's really...
And David Martin was working there with you at that time?
Yes, very much so. I brought David in as my head of the economic policy unit on something called the Exemplar Zero Initiative, that we were attempting to bring breakthrough quantum technology solutions into the world via the Gulf states. We got them to agree to put up $5 billion to be the vanguard of bringing in real quantum solutions and slam dunk the petrodollar that way. It didn't turn out too well for us. We could have gotten to, we almost got into a lot of trouble.
One more question, not about you, and then I promise to give up the mic. If the UN is a Tavistockian construct, what hope do we have? I mean, Tavistock seems to be just constructing reality. How can anyone resist it?
We have no hope whatsoever if we continue to believe in any part of the United Nations. And I know I've got good friends there still, and they'll be hurling rocks at me round about now. But it's in my considered firsthand knowledge, there is no possible way of redeeming the United Nations when the source coding is so corrupted. And it's filled with cognac swigging fat cat diplomats who are hollow vessels, have less than zero integrity in the main, and that's a real problem. Generational diplomacy, fat cat diplomacy breeds a very unique kind of character, a character lacking in character, I should say. But anyway, that's my takeaway on the United Nations. I think it's a sorry state of affairs. Thank you. My great pleasure. Steve, wanted to bring you back in here and just ask, what is your take on the state of politics in the US? And do you believe that what's playing out with the elections upcoming, do you think any part of it is going to serve the American people and people of planet Earth? Really, the juggernaut for me that I'm trying to aim is at politics, party politics altogether. It seems to me that we've reached to be polite, a fulmination in 20th century or 21st century politicking. It doesn't work. Party politics doesn't work. The chaos that Naomi just spoke to, this kind of meltdown psychosis, psycho-civilizational meltdown, is a testament to the fact that we can't be governed any longer in the same way. What do you see happening on the political landscape come the elections this year? Steve, forgive me, you'll need to unmute.
Sorry about that. I was trying to be polite. Yeah, certainly it's not my decision as to what happens in America. We will know in a couple of months from now what the American people decide to do. And they have a choice. We can continue on with the status quo and the non-working government that we have, or we can decide to make a change from the people who have been running it and restore my particular interest is restoring the health of Americans, and we can make Americans healthy again. And we have a chance of doing that if we elect former President Trump. We have no chance of doing that if we elect Kamala Harris. So I think the big decision is going to happen very shortly. And we will either have 4 more months of agony trying to get the word out, or we will have the opportunity to create a lot of systemic change in America if we elect former President Trump to be our next president. So I think that's really the big driver. Now, as far as the other part of your question, which is how do we fix democracy? Boy, that's a really good question, and I'll kind of defer answering that because I've been kind of focused for the last 3 years on the statistics regarding the COVID vaccine. But certainly one of the results of that is the data transparency. That all we need is a few changes in the law. Things like getting rid of the liability protection for vaccine manufacturers would be an enormous step in the right direction. And if that's the only change that's done, that would be tremendous. But there's clearly something wrong in the system that we're supposed to have this democracy, and yet we have laws on the books that protect vaccine manufacturers from all liabilities. Now, there is something wrong with that system, and there is something wrong with the system that has been in place, since 1986 or so, that has never been able to be challenged. And I think that if you polled most Americans, they would be against giving complete liability protection to vaccine manufacturers, especially since vaccines are supposed to be the safest medical interventions available to a physician. Why would those people who market the safest interventions need liability protection? It makes no sense. Mm-hmm. And so if we can start to address the reasons as to why those laws are on the books and those laws are not challenged by anyone who is supposed to be representing the interests of Americans, once we can do that and figure out, okay, what's wrong and how do we solve this, I think we'll be in much better shape than we are today.
Very good, very good. Sherri, you recently shared a powerful clip on X, which was an exchange between our dear belated friend, Dr. Rashid Buttar, and the then CNN anchor, Drew Griffin, in 2021, where Griffin taunted Rashid Buttar about considering him a ticking time bomb after getting vaccinated, if you recall. And sadly, Griffin did come down with what appears to have been a turbo cancer shortly after taking the bioweapon shot, and he died in 2022. To those of us who know what has taken place must help those who refuse to see. How do you think that we can best achieve this? And thank you for raising that piece on X. I think it was a very, very appropriate one. Sherri, forgive me, you're also muted there.
Sorry about that. I think that the statistics that Steve has put out, Ed Dowd has put out, and David Martin has put out about the turbo cancers, they're real. And until we see more public figures, sadly, that succumb from this taunting, I think that it's going to continue. I think that the mainstream media fails to cover all sorts of things. I mean, Steve mentioned the vaccine tragedy that's happened with Alexia here out in California. I covered that also on X yesterday, and they are in complete denial about all of those things. Again, I'll mention again the Vax 3 movie that is just a compilation. It's a 2-hour movie, a compilation of all of the of so many vaccine injured or dead people from the COVID-19 shots. I mean, it is just absolutely. Polly Tommy, who's the executive director, producer of that movie, at some point in that movie, I thought it was the key element of the entire movie. I wish she would have expounded upon it a little bit more when she said, "I'm doing 30 to 50 interviews a day." about all of these tragedies that have happened inside of the hospitals, and it's all across the country. It isn't isolated in any individual area. That I'm hearing the same thing. This is the biggest crime against humanity, and someone really needs to be looking into this and not turning a blind eye. And we've got physicians who are still promoting the COVID-19 shots. You know, they've been approved for on the pediatric schedule for 24 and 25. They're still promoting it for pregnant women. They're still wanting to give a booster to all of those people. I remember seeing the head of the CDC, this was a couple of months ago, proudly bragging upon the fact that we now have the 10th COVID booster, and sadly saying that only 22% of people were willing to take it. And my first thought after I heard that was like, what's wrong with that 22%? Why are they willing to take that? And so it's an ongoing problem. And I did an interview the other night with two gentlemen, with Greg Harrison and Tom Havland, who are organic chemists who have taken those COVID shots or those COVID jabs, the long stringy clots that they pull out that they said is about the consistency of calamari. And they have actually analyzed it with physical chemistry technologies, and they found that so much of it has to do with the lipid nanoparticles, bound up with the spike proteins, and that there's a large amount of phosphorus that ignites them, and that causes the clotting in the normal clotting system in our human body that we are born with, and that is going to go on forever. And when I asked them the question of saying, well, what about people that have had COVID jabs 2, 3, 4 years ago now? Are they still going? And they had one and they've not had any more. What is the likelihood of them developing these long fibrous clots? And unfortunately, sadly they said it is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing filamentous process, and that's why we are still seeing people dropping over, died suddenly. So it's until we pull these things off the market, until we change what you said, the 1986 Act, until we get rid of the PrEP Act, which is even worse, that was passed in 2005, which has become the template for which they have perfected and are going to continue to use it over and over and over again with the covered countermeasures. It's an endless situation, Sacha. And one of the questions that I got last night, as I went to that premiere, and then I did a Q&A session afterwards with people. One of the people in the audience said, "Why are there not hordes of people that are going after these people? Why is Fauci still walking on the street? Why has Burke sort of been able to float off into the distance? Why are they still able to manufacture these deadly, dastardly things?" And I didn't really have an answer for them. I don't know why there isn't some revolutionary group that is coming forward, why we're depending on the legal system, which turns slowly to be able to happen, and why the American citizens and the citizens of the world aren't standing up and saying enough, like they're doing in Africa.
So that actually goes back to the point that Naomi was asking me about the United Nations. Is there any hope so long as we have a United Nations? Any of the multilateral organizations, agencies, they're all just as rotten as each other. Every single one of them. NATO is a diabolical construct. And simply a preservation. It's a war machine designed to preserve the black nobility's hegemony over coin issuing out of Switzerland, essentially. The Crown of England is the clearinghouse, and Basel, Switzerland, and all the rest of it. So the United Nations and the multilateral treaties that exist out there trump local law, that's the problem. Is the United Nations, the Security Council is a bully boy corridor. But you've got
Sacha, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to ask you, because you're right on the roll with this. I mean, the United Nations is having a very big meeting the 20th, 21st through the 23rd to get all these countries to sign on and employ their, I pledge allegiance to the United Nations. So please continue on with what you're saying, because people don't know that this is happening.
Right, and that's the point. I've been screaming about it for 15 years, longer, 20 years, even before the UN came to me and asked me if I could come in and help sex up their agenda, which I agreed to on certain conditions. That's why I brought David Martin in at that time, because we had some real plans to change the soup. And good people in the UN, high brass, really wanted us to do that. But once we got in, we realized that it wasn't the capstone of the pyramid that was rotten. The top cats in the UN were relatively good guys, and the body politic of the UN was made up of really good people. But there was a technocratic, kind of a Jesuitical core that was the insulation between the capstone and the body politic. And boom, that was where we saw the money. The Clinton Global Initiative was the product of that, incidentally, the CGI. So you got a situation where you have these multilateral treaties which do trump local covenants and compacts because they have to sit at the table with 50 other countries, 100 other countries once a year at the General Assembly meeting. They get bullied, they get coerced, cajoled. The WHO comes in to harmonize legislation and regulations and compliances. Harmonize, that's the term they use. The world economics are governed by the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, the World Bank, and the IFC, International Finance Corporation. So those multilateral big boys are the bullies. And they're literally sending their hitmen in, their agents in to Mozambique, to Somalia, to Ecuador, to Burkina Faso. And they are bullying the bejesus out of the governments. Their coercion tactics, the very worst, because they can foment coups overnight by pulling the financial rug from underneath any of these fragile economies. And these poor, beleaguered leaders, and I have met with hundreds of kings, queens, sultans, rajas, presidents, prime ministers. It's what I've done. It's been my wheelhouse. Even now I do that. I meet with leadership and I try to see where we can come in and help jerry-rig solutions and situations. I can tell you it is impossible to conduct any right action or pure truth so long as there is a multilateral edifice, a Babylonian edifice called the United Nations. Simple as that. I hope that rant was suitable to you, Sherri.
That was
you're
wonderful.
right.
Thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the UN. Indeed, this is Babylonian Central. Tom, I confess, my mum is here with me visiting for a few days in Africa, and she's down the corridor there somewhere, probably hiding under a pillow right now. But she used to be a Top Gun news editor, and huge fan of all of you, incidentally. She's just so thrilled you're coming on. And I said to her this morning over breakfast, I said, I expect a hard question for each of my guests from you. And I confess she came up with two, one for you, Tom, and one for Steve. And she didn't come up with the ones for Naomi and Sherri in time, so I snatched away the paper. But here's the question for you, Tom, from my mum. So this is Mummy's Corner in the Arise Guerrilla broadcast.
Pressure's on.
Right, exactly. RFK says he'll take on Big Pharma if Trump wins by replacing the heads of CDC, NIH, etc. How can hospital CEOs and medical boards also be disarmed? And could that cascade into integrity and transparency?
I got a good answer for you. So the problem that occurred, and one of the most important things that facilitated COVID, was Obamacare. Now, there's a lot of things that we can all say are great in Obamacare. Who doesn't want prior conditions to still to be able to buy insurance? But you've got to understand, Obamacare was sold to the public on a couple things, but did a lot of horrible things. And the two most relevant things that it did that facilitated COVID were the consolidation of independent doctors into healthcare systems and the use of electronic medical records. Okay? Those two things were critical. You have to understand that when a doctor in a hospital system gets their protocols, gets their information, gets their whatever, they get it from the hospital system. It goes through the hospital system's medical board, the directors up there who decide what are the proper protocols, the way that they're going to treat it, and they create standards of care that legally are very, very difficult to deal with, right? So the malpractice is generally defined as deviating from the standard of care, and typically in a geographic location. But when an entire hospital system runs almost an entire state, well, they set the standard of care everywhere. And so if a doctor wants to do something different, like, for example, when COVID hits, if a doctor wants to use ivermectin instead of remdesivir, well, that doctor is deviating from the standard of care in that hospital system. So the hospital is going to say that could be malpractice. We're going to fire you if you do it. That was a result of Obamacare. There's a lot more that occurred. Obamacare allowed for tracking and tracing of our health and what was going on and everything else. The data that was collected through electronic medical records is terrifying. And, you know, the thing about the electronic medical records aspect of Obamacare is at this point, everybody likes to think that their medical records are private. The only person that can't talk about your health is your doctor. Once you get put into the EMRs have sharing agreements with insurance, with government, with all these different groups, and it's all over the internet. The whole thing was a disaster. If we want to actually take care of the issues with the hospital system, we're going to have to roll back certain aspects of Obamacare. We're going to have to start having independent doctors. Imagine if there were 10,000 Sherri Tenpennys out there during COVID. You know, Sherri's maintained her independence. That's why Sherri could speak the truth. They couldn't fire her, although they did go after her license. There were a number of good doctors out there that spoke out, but the doctors who spoke out were either independent or fired. And then the medical boards went after their license. So the ultimate solution here to dealing with this is we're going to have to change some of the law. And again, we're going to have to get over the fact that Obamacare was some sort of a big saving thing. There were good aspects of it, but there were also terrible aspects of it. And unless we roll back and start really empowering independent doctors again, we're going to be in serious, serious trouble. In Ohio, I just was supporting and we're working on legislation that allows doctors to determine how they want to treat their patients without risk of medical boards coming after their licenses and other such things. The doctor-patient relationship right now under Obamacare is fourth in terms of importance. Before you get to the doctor-patient relationship legally, you have the doctor-hospital relationship, the doctor regulator relationship or the government, and the doctor insurance company relationship. Only after those boxes are checked does the doctor-patient relationship come into play. And I'm going to finish with one thing, then I'm going to shut up because I think Naomi's got to go and I have to jump as well. I have in front of me, you asked Sherri about the turbo cancers. I have a November 2006 document, Guidance for Industry, Gene Therapy Clinical Trials Observing Subjects for Delayed Adverse Events. Within that document, they define gene therapy products in a way that would absolutely encompass the current COVID mRNA vaccines. And they specifically say that these long-term delayed adverse events that we're seeing include, and I'm going to read this verbatim, expression of transgene may also be associated with long-term risks resulting from unregulated cell growth and malignant transformation, which is cancer, autoimmune-like reaction to self-antigens, and unpredictable adverse events. We're seeing all three of those. And the turbo cancer was something that our FDA knew was likely to occur. I've got a long paper trail here. They covered it up. They lied about it. They hid it. Pfizer knew it. Moderna knew it. Everybody knew it. They lied, and they just figured that it would take a few years for those cancers to hit. So it would be very hard to show the causal relationship. Sacha, thanks. I got to jump off this. I hope that was good for Mom.
No, that was fantastic, Tom. Thanks very much. Greatly appreciated. Naomi, I think you've got to go as well. We got early warning of that. I've got a couple, one more question for Steve, and then I'll ask Sherri to also sign off. But Naomi, thank you for joining us today. Wonderful seeing you.
You too, thank you. And if people would kindly support the team that brought you so many of these headlines by ordering the Pfizer papers on Amazon now, it's very helpful for a book to have pre-orders. Thank you very much.
We'll push that out long and hard. Thank you, Naomi.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Very good. Steve, my mother's question for you was, surely there's already provision in law to criminally prosecute Big Pharma for not properly testing and correctly publishing data, and similarly for both institutions and doctors who remain silent in the face of overwhelming evidence of malpractice. But what about law to end the revolving doors between CDC, NIH, AMA, FDA, so on, and Big Pharma?
Well, I think that's secondary to the problem. That was suggested by RFK Jr. in a Wall Street Journal editorial where he listed 12 points, things that need to change, and so that revolving door was one of the aspects that needs to be changed. But the problem is that we don't have those criminal prosecutions that you're talking about. They may exist in theory, but they don't exist in practice. And the reason they don't exist in practice is because people have tried to do them and have failed. So, for example, there's a court case where with the, let's see, I think it was the MMR vaccine. And it's a film by Andrew Wakefield called Protocol 7. And he documents the case, and this is a very long trial. I think it was 15 years or more. And basically, if the government doesn't believe that they're defrauded because they went in on it and they knew they were being defrauded, they're not considered to be defrauded. So you can't use any kind of a fraud claim to whistleblow on these people. So they keep getting away with misleading the public and misleading the authorities, and the authorities know that they're being misled, so it's not considered any kind of violation. And so it's very troubling what's going on right now, because these people are literally getting away with murder. They have a license to kill. And that's not right. It's not right to be able to, in America, give these corporations effectively a license to kill. And they have killed at least 500,000 Americans, and that's at the very lowest estimate that I have for these. And so we need to stop the killing first before we address the revolving door issue. Certainly that's important, but it's not as important as holding people accountable for the at least 500,000 Americans who have been killed by their own government.
Yeah, indeed. Sherri, your comments to what Steve is saying. I mean, for me, it's a simple mathematical equation. Government doesn't work. The whole godless construct of, as I mentioned, the multilateral playing field, on which I'm something of an expert, doesn't work. It is broken and rotten to the core. Government itself, everywhere I go around the world, and I'm constantly traveling, government doesn't work. And I sit down with leadership constantly, and they agree with me. It doesn't work. It's broken. It was always broken. So for me, the business of fleecing humans through taxations in order to conflate a technology called government, which devours humanity on behalf of a cloister of Sabbatean bankers in Switzerland, that's part of the enterprise. It goes back to the Masonic, roots of government and the Roman Catholic Church. Government today is the franchise of the Roman Catholic Church. The point being, none of it works. And for me, it's a question of having to completely burn that to the ground and get out of Sodom and Gomorrah and go back to a covenant with the living soil. People should get out, claim allodial titling. We're doing it right now in Tennessee, incidentally. Myself and my group, we're in the process of establishing a full-fledged micronation in Tennessee, in the heartland of USA. We anticipate by spring next year to have done all the filings, made all the public notices to the Pentagon, to the UN, to Vatican, Crown of England, and then bring people in under a whole new covenant, a whole new constitution. But it seems to me that no part of it works. So why are we paying any kind of attention, much less homage, much less coin, to keep that Leviathan going? Your thoughts, Sherri?
I support everything that you just said, Sacha. I think that that's just an amazing sort of thing. It's and not only do governments not work, I mean, big systems don't work, like big ag, big food, big medicine, big healthcare. All of those things have become dictatorial tyrants to the people. And I think that all of them need to be dismantled. We were well on our way, really back in 2015 to getting the mass of American people educated about problems associated with vaccines when they started implementing, taking away your right to refuse, by SB 277, then SB 276 in California, and then that's marched in states across the country. And so people's right to bodily autonomy, and I've said for a long time, the separation between me and my government should start at the level of my skin. And we need to get back to that bodily autonomy. I mean, the whole idea of insurance, that we pay this thing over here to pay our medical bills. Why don't we just pay directly our medical bills to our physicians or whoever's taking care of us, and the cost would just fall out of the bottom. When they started making healthcare companies a public commodity traded on the New York Stock Exchange, they became beholden to their shareholders and no longer beholden to their customers, their doctors, or their hospital systems. That is another big thing that needs to be dismantled and go away. And until people have been so indoctrinated and trained with that commodity, that until they stop saying, does my insurance pay for it? We're going to be hard pressed to get a new healthcare system, because they're so used to that thing over there paying for me, and I pay that thing over there a lot of money.
Right.
So, like
Right.
a big egg, big food, all the different things that they're doing with cattle and chickens and factory farming, all of it needs to be dismantled, in my opinion. Not just government. But good government in the way that you're talking about is a good place to start. What do you think, Sacha, with your connections and your brilliance and your way of putting this together, you and Steve both, if you're thinking about that, how do we mobilize more than just little factions of people across the country? I mean, this whole election process, 48 days away, that is really, really frightening. I mean, how do we really mobilize people to understand these concepts that we've been talking about here today?
How does one mobilize? My answer to that, Sherri, is pretty straightforward, is remove all attention from the creature that is seeking to destroy you. In much the same way that good Catholics and churchgoers around the world have over recent years withdrawn their attention from the whore of Babylon, which is the Vatican. They've literally withdrawn their attention from that construct and returned more to the mystical traditions of the good Christic faith. So Christianity is blooming. The mystical traditions, the true traditions of the Essenes and the Cathars is blooming, is flowering in the heart of Middle America. I see it all the time and around the world. But the false light construct of the Roman Catholic Church, so to speak, and the pedophilic nonsense that's been endemic in that institution for generations, all of which has been exposed now, has really laid to waste the edifice of the Christian religion, in the same way that fundamentalist Islam is also on its back foot for the first time in well over 1,000 years, because of the nature of fundamentalism. It's been seen to be what it is. It's diabolical, it's satanic, it's Luciferian, it's anti-humanity, it's anti-God. So the big religious constructs have fallen down. Now the final construct or edifice which remains in our midst is this creature called government. And it is a hollow vehicle. It's a hollow vessel. It is the little wizard with a little dick behind the curtain. That's what government is. It's a failed patriarchy. And it's not inhabited by humans any longer. It's all automated. It's AI. It's bureaucrats and technocrats and systems. There was this great saying, which is that, the phantom numbers were being entered into the ledgers on the outer fringes of empire 50 years after Rome fell. Fact. So on the outer fringes of the Roman Empire, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they were still entering into the ledgers, the clerks. But the empire had fallen decades ago before. And that's kind of how I see government today. It's not really there. It's just systems and AI and supercomputation that's in play. And anyway, looking at the face of Joseph, gibbering sock puppet Biden, and his sidekick, Kamala pole dancer Harris, that's what it is. It's a joke. It's a Punch and Judy show. So to my answer is withdraw all attention from it, pay no homage to it, certainly don't pay any coin to it, Tear up all the contracts, the spells and bonds. Stop filling out forms with block black capital letters. When a brown envelope comes from the IRS, write FUCKOFF_, send it back, and remove yourself from the contract with the IRS. There is no law anywhere in America, law that requires you to pay income tax. That's the big joke. But there are plenty of laws that exist which would allow people to claim back their utility bills, their mortgages, their bank loans, their credit cards, and have them discharged against their birth bonds, their treasury bonds. That's the new gnosis. That's the new knowledge that needs to now be seized upon by people in Middle America and indeed Middle Earth. Real knowledge.
Touche.
Steve.
Yeah, so just yeah, it's unfortunately it's an unsolved problem. We've known that vaccines cause autism for over 20 years now, and yet there's been no progress in 20 years.
None.
This is a well-known problem. So it's not so simple as when you say how can people mobilize. First, you got to get people to be aware of the problem. In order to do that, in order for them to believe it, you have to convince the medical community. But the whole thing is set up so that the medical community will not speak out because they don't want to have their license to practice medicine revoked. So,
or their big paychecks taken away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So this it's persisted for decades, and we've had lots of kids who are paying the price, the lifetime price for this because they're autistic.
That's right. And it's an abomination. Well, look, I think this has been a very, very helpful, if somewhat sobering, planetary health check. I'm very, very grateful to you, Steve Kirsch, and Dr. Sherri. I mean, you're both such extraordinary icons of the day, and I know history will reflect, if it's important, is another matter, but history will reflect on the extraordinary work that both of you have done and continue to do. Thank you very much for joining me today on the AGN Planetary Health Check.
At New Earth Pharmacy, we firmly believe in the transformative power of naturally organic innovation to positively impact lives. The dedicated team of New Earth Pharmacy has successfully created an extraordinary and groundbreaking brand. We aim to reduce reliance on the pharmaceutical industry and its intermediaries, giving people the power to write their own wellness script. We're pioneering a movement that empowers individuals to take control of their well-being. Our team and advisory committee have worked long hours, ensuring that our products incorporate the best opportunity for full-spectrum immune support. Every step has been a carefully choreographed chain of events leading up to our launch. By harnessing the proteins derived from organically raised hens, we offer a long-awaited solution for those who have felt neglected by the traditional medical community. Our endeavor brings unprecedented innovation like nothing the world has seen before. New Earth Spike and New Earth Spike Turbo uses patent-pending egg protein technology to support the body's ability to defend against symptoms related to spike protein exposure. The New Earth Pharmacy is pleased to present our supplement, the New Earth Spike and New Earth Spike Turbo. Together, we are igniting a revolution. Welcome to a new era of wellness. Welcome to New Earth Pharmacy.